Hi, everybody. I decided to re-record. You're not going to realize that, of course, because you won't have seen the other one. But I wanted to add some slides to the academic article discussion because I thought it was too confusing without it. So there's two academic articles that I've asked you to read. The first one is by Wortman, and it talks about how the automotive industry progressed through certain a time frame basically. And it started out with what Wortman called craft production in the 1880s. This is when cars were built by hand. Everything was built by the OEM, or the manufacturer of the vehicle. We didn't have seats going out to a seating supplier. Everything was built in house, and the vehicles were built one at a time, without an assembly line. Then we progressed to Ford with the introduction of the assembly line in 1914, which made the production much easier, right? It moved along an assembly line, and it was easier for the company to put the vehicle together. Things became more standard and more predictable, more reliable. And then we moved to Wortman considers this lean production, where we took a lot of the work in progress out of the manufacturing plant. So where we had all these pieces of inventory sitting around the cells, now inventory was brought in as needed, just in time, and things like that. And as we did that, there was a period of time where the parts of the vehicle became part of a supplier network. So instead of making everything in-house, things were farmed off to suppliers, and then those suppliers brought those pieces in as they were needed as we got closer to this lean production. That supplier migration also introduced stability, and as we remember from Christensen from the last module, it introduced a lot of rigidity to the system. We had more profits because we were able to leverage economies of scale. So not just the OEM, but then the suppliers were able to leverage economies of scale, because obviously suppliers supply to multiple OEMs. So for instance, if they were buying brown leather for brown leather seats across 3 manufacturers, they're going to buy a whole lot more and get a better rate on them, therefore transferring that lower cost onto the manufacturer. So those were the things that were embedded in. And then configurable products, where the product was not built to the exact specifications of the consumer. So Ford was one that was actually known for, you could order anything on a Ford, and they would figure out how to build it for you. You're not going to get it, as cheap as something you'd get off the lot at a dealership, but they'd build anything they wanted. But when we got to this lean production, configurable products, a lot of that had to go away because it would interrupt the process of making the vehicle, making it more expensive, and really slowing down the overall productivity of the plant. So that went away. And configurable products were where you had some choices that you could make, right? You had a choice of the color of the interior, whether you wanted it cloth or leather, but a choice of color within colors that were already acceptable, right? So you're not going to get a color that's not on their little card for you. So it became easier and easier for the manufacturers to make the vehicles. They became more and more reliable because people weren't interjecting these individual pieces that had to then be custom ordered. So what Wortman looked at was that software followed a similar path. And I thought this was really interesting because it was something we could understand. Like we could understand how vehicles were made and easy to see the changes within the vehicle. But from a software perspective, looking at it from the standpoint of bespoke development, which is where an individual company like General Motors or Ford would develop their own individual piece of software for a generic process like accounting or customer relationship management, plant floor management, ERP, all of the different elements of ERP were all custom developed within an organization. Where this becomes significant is in the next article, the Che article. Let me just show you this. Hold on. Let me go to this because it's kind of important to go here. So the Che article is right here in the middle of the pack. These articles began with Bharadwaj. Bharadwaj looked at the fact, and we'll go back now, that this bespoke development that happened back in the 70s, and you can see it kind of continued on, it continued on into probably the early 80s. I mean, here we were starting to get systems that were more configuring. I mean, you could still touch the source code and make significant changes, and obviously you can do that today, but it's not efficient anymore. And right about here, when client server and ERP mid-market adoption became available, these systems were considerably less expensive than down here, these high-end hardware-centric applications. We're talking about millions of dollars for a single computer and millions of dollars in development for individuals working within the organization that were employees of the organization who had to be paid benefits, etc. So it was super, super expensive to develop applications back here. As client server applications became available, that footprint got a lot smaller. It became a lot less expensive, and smaller businesses were able to buy them and leverage applications that were more configurable. They were built by IBM. I remember, I worked at IBM back in this time, and we sold applications called Coppix, which ran on the mainframe, and Mapix, which ran on these mid-level computers. And they were state-of-the-art applications that were more customizable, so you weren't necessarily working the way we do now with cloud-based applications, and we'll come to that in a minute. But they were more customizable, but you didn't actually have to customize them. So smaller companies that didn't have large IT organizations could still use these applications and get a lot of benefit from them, and in some ways more benefit, because as these applications became richer and richer, the less customizing that the smaller companies did out of necessity, the easier it was to upgrade to the latest level of this computer. So where these larger companies that used bigger computers and did a lot of customization for their organization, moving from like one level of SAP to another became a major transition. It was very expensive, and sometimes it wasn't even justifiable. So they would stay on the lesser level with their customizations and therefore not have the benefits of the new features. So it was in this space here, and we'll go back, that Che came along and started looking at the data. So you can see his data. Where's my data? Years. Okay, so Bharadwaj was 1991 to 1994. So again, they're still looking at, let's go back. They're still looking at client server mid-market adoption, but you still have a lot of these, applications and computers around. They stayed around for a very long time, and we still have mainframes. But now we're starting to get this mid-market adoption. By the time we get over here where we're talking about multi-tier components and ASP, this is the beginning of cloud computing, application service providing, where you were starting to be able to use systems that were kind of cloud-based. You started to see a little bit of a transition, but there was still an advantage to these larger organizations. By the time Che came around, where Che was looking at data from 2001 to 2004 and financials from 2001 to 2007, what he was doing, he was mimicking the same study that Bharadwaj did. So they had a whole bunch of organizations that they chose as industry leaders, and then they found a control group, basically a non-industry leader, so perhaps a company that didn't have these giant IT organizations. And they compared the business performance using these financials. And what Che found, and what you read in the article, was that there was starting to become a a leveling of capabilities and a leveling of firm performance. And this came because these smaller firms that had adopted client server and were starting to use them were now starting to see the benefits of these systems within their organization, and they were able to get better, in some cases, financial performance than the legacy systems. And so what Che found was it is not conclusive that IT leaders, and these were defined as organizations with very large IT organizations, lots of employees writing custom code, no longer had the advantage of firm performance. This goes on, so this was another study that was done in 2016. The studies were done much earlier. It takes a very long time to get academic articles published. So the data was pulled from the same time as Che, and he said there was mixed performance. So in some ways, the IT leaders exceeded, and in some ways, the control group exceeded. So they were mixed performance. And if you think about it, though, by the time we got to, oops, oh shoot, oh there we go, sorry. So by the time we were getting to this area, some of the, large IT organizations would have started to adopt these systems as well. And when we get down here, these become configurable products. So this insinuates basically that you are now in software as a service and cloud computing, because when you get to software as a service, systems are you can't customize them anymore. You can configure them, so you can choose options just like in the vehicles, right? I couldn't choose light blue versus just blue, right? We had some limitations on what we could configure. So when we got to this point in software, the same thing happened. We were just configuring. We were no longer customizing. So when these updates became available, they were easier to integrate into the organization. And you started to see this homogenization of benefits because the larger organizations were doing it as well. So that huge benefit that Bharadwaj saw way back in the early 90s was no longer evident based on the work that Che did. And his hypothesis was that these configurable systems were making a difference in these smaller firms, and they were now able to compete in this space. So this is why I chose these two articles, because this is all about SaaS and these types of advanced applications and how they affected firm performance, because that's really what we're looking for as a business school. We're looking for what are the business advantages of using software? What are the business advantages of cloud? And it's not just that things are in the cloud, it's that this configuration versus customization is much less expensive. It is much easier to get a return on investment in this space, and you avoid that productivity paradox that Che talks about. So productivity paradox is where you just spend more and more and more money and you don't get additional benefit from it. And that's kind of where businesses were in this space, because they were just spending more and more money to continue to customize their applications, to try to update them, because these were all homegrown applications, and not getting any benefit from it. Because in order to get a benefit, you've got to sell more product. You've got to get a return from the business, not just improve the software. It's got to be pushed out to the organization, and the organization has to be able to benefit from it. When you're talking about configurable products that are available, theoretically right out of the box, but even if you're not, taking a vanilla version, you're only configuring it, you're not customizing it. So you're using a lot less time. You're potentially putting yourself in a position where you can use updates much faster, and that is giving you benefits within the business, because the business is not waiting for things to change. Things are changing as needed. The updates are fairly transparent within the application, and people are just able to do their job a little bit better. So these academic articles support this transition that we see, where software follows this similar path, and we see the advantages, from a business perspective. And we're able to quantify that. So the reason I chose these articles was I wanted you to be able to read from an academic perspective what the path that software has taken and the impact of software as a service. And that's it. Oops, sorry guys.